Thank you all for coming. The answer to the question, when should we go to war in a world of perpetual peace, as Immanuel Kant would have it, would be never. But we don't live in that perfect world. We live in the real world. And the answer that even in the real world should be as seldom as possible. The best way to avoid a war, though, is to be prepared to fight a war and then to be willing to fight a war to defend America's interests. On the first point, we have to be prepared to fight a war. And like Ambassador Bolton, I'm deeply concerned that we are increasingly unprepared to fight a war to defend our interests around the world. The National Defense Panel, a distinguished collection of defense professionals and scholars, recently wrote in a unanimous report from people on both sides of the aisle that without substantial increases to our defense budget, our military would be unable to execute the national defense strategy pursuant to the national security strategy. That's why I, as a senator, will advocate for substantial increases in spending on our defense budget in the coming weeks as the Republican Senate draft our budget, well beyond what current levels under sequestration spending caps would require, beyond what President Obama proposed in his budget earlier this month. We have to realize, as Ambassador Bolton said, that not every dollar of federal spending is equal. And in fact, there is no item on which we could spend our federal taxpayer dollars and get a more important return than our military and our intelligence professionals and our diplomacy, all of which are designed to keep America safe and strong without having to go to war in the first place. Yet, as Ambassador Bolton said, you also sometimes face a world where deterrence breaks down, and the world has to know that you are willing to go to war. That's both our allies and our enemies. Regrettably, right now, many people around the world don't believe that our president is willing to go to war. When would we be going to war? To defend our core national security interest when our territory and our people are attacked, as they were in World War II at Pearl Harbor, as they were on 9/11 in New York, here or across the river in Virginia and in Pennsylvania. When our allies are invaded, as happened in Kuwait, when Saddam Hussein crossed an international border and threatened more allies in the region as well. When we have transnational terrorist groups like the Islamic State operating in lawless safe havens, like Syria or Iraq, increasingly Libya and elsewhere, as Al-Qaeda did in Afghanistan in the years before the 9/11 attacks. To be willing to go to war, to stop those kinds of threats to our national security interests means, in most cases, we will not have to. Churchill called World War II the unnecessary war. Because of all the wars Europe had fought, it was the one war that he believed to be the most avoidable. If at any stage in the 1930s, the West had stood up to Adolf Hitler. Increasingly, the world thinks that America will not stand up to aggressors around the world. And it looks to us because we are the one global power, the one force for global order, without which there is not perpetual peace. There is global chaos and global disorder. That doesn't mean that we go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, quote John Quincy Adams, but it does mean that we have to be strong and prepared and willing to fight a war in defense of our interests, in defense of our allies, and to deter our enemies before they reach the point where they are willing to test us and war becomes that much more grievous as it was in World War II. I certainly am willing, and I want our military to be prepared to fight a war, all in service so we don't have to fight a war. So our people are safe, so our allies respect us, and they defer to us because they know that we'll protect their interests, and our enemies fear us and don't test us because they know that we will confront and defeat them whenever necessary.